Well, hello there, and welcome to the Interaction Fields series of shows. This is a series where we want you to get involved. We've got a special guest on today. I will introduce him shortly. But we want you to not just watch, not just to sit back, but to get involved in the comments and the chat area. Because if you've got any questions, and I'm hoping that this show will be generating lots of questions, please put them in the comments and I will try and get them involved in our show. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going to be happening today. We have got Bruce Daisley, and Bruce used to be the head of Twitter in Europe, but he is the best-selling author of a book which has got two different names. I know it in the UK as The Joy of Work, which I've got here on my Kindle. And in the US, it's known as Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, which is also the title of his amazing podcast, which I highly recommend you listen to. You can also find him as a guest on lots of other podcasts. So there's no shortage of Bruce if you go looking for him, because Bruce has got lots to say. But first of all, the reason for this series of shows I should introduce you to, it's a man called Mr. Eric Jochimsthaler, who is the founder of Vivaldi. So, Eric, why is this series called the Interaction Field series?
It's the Interaction Field series because we all live, eat, breathe, and sleep in a world of interactions. And in that world of interactions, we live from midnight to midnight, 1,440 minutes every day. We need to figure out how to discover the joy of work, and that's why we are here today.
Yep, and also there's this thing here which people can buy to find out more about your thinking about interaction fields, which is a wonderful book we've got there. So there we go. We've promoted 2 books already. I'll just promote mine while we're at it as well.
3 books, there we go.
So let's meet our guest for today. I've already told you how amazing he is. So please say a big hello. Not that he'll be able to hear you, but I want you, wherever you are in front of the computer, just wave and say hello to Bruce Daisley. Hey, Bruce, how are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bruce, where are you hailing from? You are in?
I'm in, right now I'm dialing in from North London, but originally I come from Birmingham, which is in the middle of the UK.
The heartland.
Absolutely.
The heartland of work. So Dave, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Bruce, your book came out, was it last year? Yeah, and when it came out, we had no idea that anything like what we were living through in 2020 was going to happen. And you wrote 30 rules in your book to help people get more out of work, to enjoy work more, and to be more productive. And everything's changed. Is your book still as relevant anymore? Do we need a second edition of your book, a special 2020 edition?
Yeah, it's a really we've got an odd relationship with work to some extent, right? It's a bit like when kids ask each other at school, "Do you like school?" And it's so ingrained that it's a really important thing that we say to each other at that age. No, I don't like school. Why would I like school? Who says I like school? And we've got a similar relationship when it comes to work. That we're often reluctant to confess any sense of connection with work, and even in as much as we do it, we'll either profess ambition or we'll profess that we don't necessarily like work, but we like the people we work with. And I think we often have this strange conflicted relationship, and my feeling was resolutely that there'd been times when I'd done jobs where I'd adored the people I'd worked with, I'd loved the environment I was working in, and as a consequence of that, as a team member, whenever I found myself in a situation where I wasn't feeling it, I wanted to know how to get it back. And specifically, I'll tell you, I had the good fortune to work for, I worked in UK media, but then I went on and worked at YouTube, worked there for 4 years, setting up the YouTube business in the UK, and then worked for 8 years in Twitter. So I was very fortunate to help create cultures that I felt were enjoyable places for people to work. But the really interesting thing for me was that often the ingredients of what makes enjoyable places isn't necessarily as linear as we might hope. And what I discovered is that I was in a situation where quite often we would find the work culture in certain places I worked, something had gone wrong. And the reason why I created the book was that it was an instructional, it was like a cookbook, that if you wanted to improve one aspect of work, you could look at that and seek a way to do it. Very much aimed at an audience of someone who's not the boss rather than the boss.
So,
If I'm
Bruce, when I read the book, and what you're just saying now is that you talk a lot about culture and a lot about people, a lot of your hacks. And when you talk about joy, you haven't really talked about the grudgery stuff that you do at YouTube or Twitter. You talk about the human side, and I'm just curious to the question that Dave had. Hasn't that just changed totally now in the pandemic and maybe post-pandemic? How do you see that?
Well, look, I think the really critical component is understanding that we seem to be motivated by our jobs when we feel like we can bring some autonomy to bear. I've been really interested this week. I've been reading. It's not around. I've been reading this guide of computer game design, because the people who build computer games, obviously you do that completely on your own generally, and you might be plugged into a network of other people, but you do that on your own, and they need to find a way to keep you stimulated and entertained and motivated to do something that's unrewarded. And there's really interesting lessons. What you discover about great computer game design, there's a constant process of learning. So you're constantly in a process of self-improvement, of mastery, you might call it. But it's really critical that people have a sense of autonomy. And these important lessons, I think, about the moment we're going through right now about that. The people who found this strange experience that we're living through right now to be most exhausting are the ones who are summoned to video calls from morning till noon till dusk. And they're summoned into these video calls. They have no control about whether they attend them or not. They sit there inert in these big video meetings that they can't necessarily participate in. And then they're dumped out of them to go and answer emails. And those two things in aggregate mean that we don't feel we're getting better at anything, and we don't feel that we've got any autonomy. And so these really interesting lessons. What can work learn from computer game design? We need to return people to feeling like they can make decisions, like they can make contributions. And I think that's the really critical thing. I think there's going to be, for me, it's a really interesting experiment we're entering into now, because if you know that website Glassdoor aggregates people's opinions about different companies, and it allows you to rate and review like an Amazon product. It allows you to rate your company. And what those things have largely done till now, really, they've been a reflection of who the reviewer's boss, the reviewer's manager. And what we're going to is a situation where there's going to be a real difference. There's going to be some people who say, while I'm working remotely, and I guess, the news of the last 24 hours is that remote won't necessarily be full time for all time. But while I'm working remotely, I really feel like I'm inspired, I'm empowered. And then when I'm in the office, there's a real sense of energy. Some people are going to be saying that. Other people are going to be saying, my firm saved money, making us go remote as much as possible, but I just sit on video calls all day. And there's going to be a real difference between what people are describing, the experience that they're describing. So for me, it's a really interesting moment because for the first time, it's a bit, we've all been unleashed in this sort of open savannah to go and discover, and the outcomes are going to be very different, I think.
That's a really good point, because I feel like in every meeting I'm like in broadcasting, and like this one, I am even in internal meetings with a very small group, because and I cannot really correct myself in I need to. It's sort of like my word is taken for whatever I said, and I can't walk out of that meeting and clap somebody on the back of the shoulder and says, "Look, really well done," or something, or "Look, let me clarify what my point of view was." It's sort of done. I go to the next meeting and the next meeting, and it seems like a lot of pieces that sort of like fall apart. And I really like the analogy of almost like a savannah, that where we used to know what the world of work was like. You go to an office, you spend there 8-10 hours or more, and then you go home and you manage in between, and work from home was sort of a minor a minor solution for not many people. And now it's a very eclectic mix of work styles. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much so. The really interesting thing is if we delve into some of the evidence and data. So I was fortunate to run a seminar for a few people this week, and what I heard live from people was very similar to what's reported in the polls and the surveys. So what do we know? Well, the 85% of people say they don't want to go back to working the way they were before. They want to keep some degree of remote working, some degree of being able to work from home. I think partly because they like the fact that they can get stuff done. A lot of us remember, if we didn't have our own offices, a lot of us remember wandering around offices looking for a quiet meeting room to get something done. That sense of just, oh my God, I can't sit here anymore listening to more people talk about last night's Netflix, last night's TV. I need to go and find somewhere. So I think a lot of people love that part of working from home. But in addition, most people say they don't want to work from home all the time. So we've got this duality. We can have two apparently oppositional opinions at the same time. And I think that's where we are. We're in a zone where people are going to be saying, okay, I'd like to work 2 days a week in the office, as long as there's something different about that. I don't want to be going into the office to then sit on video calls all day. I can do that from home. So I need to be going into the office to do something different. And it's where you sort of start to get people talking about different models. There's an advertising man in the UK called Rory Sutherland.
Yeah.
About Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. People who will work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or these mofos Monday and Friday. People who will work Monday and Friday. And I think we're sort of going to get these different models of some. If you've got a sales team, maybe getting them in for a Monday morning, kick off the week, getting them in on Friday, maybe to go out and meet some customers face to face. You can definitely see that being a dynamic that might work. Different teams are going to work in different ways. But the reason why it matters to have those things lined up is the office has a network effect to it. And one of the things that we know from some of these online only firms, some of these remote only firms like Basecamp or Automatic, they make WordPress, and they went remote. And what they discovered was that they had offices in a lot of the cases where they would allow people to come in, but people would make the journey into the office. You're in Manhattan. People would make the journey to the office. You'd make an hour's journey there. You get there, there's no one there. Immediately you think, or you're doing video calls, worse, you're doing video calls with people back at home, immediately you think, well, unless I've got a reason to go into the city, why would I go into the city? And very quickly you stop doing that. Well, I think we've all established from all of that data, from all of the anecdotal experience, we do feel there is a benefit in being around people. But if it can't happen by accident anymore, we need to plan it. So that's why you're going to get this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday thing, or why you're going to get some organizations might say, we just meet every Tuesday. And,
this may be a healing solution for many work cultures because I like to go with the people, my people on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the people I don't like to work with, they go Monday, Friday. So with proper planning, you can avoid running into you can avoid running into your boss, and you only have a good time with.
Absolutely.
I am. What's sort of fascinating, Bruce, is that you paint. I was sort of coming out of this pandemic. I feel like I'm more in the world. We are so connected. I'm more isolated. I feel lonely. I feel isolated. I feel deprived. I always had people around me, and most of them would. It was nice to have a chat, and I thought, like, the post-pandemic, everybody, 85%. Many want to work from home, but and so we're in this mixture. I felt like sort of I had more sort of a negative view of where we are going into the savannah world. But what I'm so delighted about is you actually have a very positive view on all of this, because if really the two principles that you say is autonomy, sense of autonomy, and sort of having a sense of control about your lives, and sort of this idea of developing and nurturing and the process of learning, those two principles in this world that we are going to is really much more feasible than where we come from.
Absolutely. But I think you've mentioned something really critical there, which is that sense of isolation. Now, what we know is that to create good workplace cultures, you need to foster a sense of belongingness. And belongingness, just to be really clear, there's really good evidence that it's one of the highest order things that we require as human beings. Some work that, we're all very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but some analysis that was done by Roy Baumeister, a really esteemed psychologist. He looked into all the evidence and he said that, we've got this really clear notion of the hierarchy of needs that starts with the most fundamental needs being food and shelter, and then going up and it's belongingness. And he said, I've struggled to find any evidence that suggests that belongingness isn't equally as important as those sort of prerequisites, food and shelter. Belongingness sort of is the whole human raison d'etre, and it seems like it's programmed into our DNA. There's a really strange phenomenon. People who sleep alone, I don't make the rules here. What I'm going to tell you is like this vivid injustice. But people who sleep alone generally have what are called micro awakenings. They wake up 15 times a night. Because why? Because as human beings, we're programmed to associate being alone with the absence of safety. So belongingness seems to be a really critical need. And you'll probably know one of the biggest studies, longitudinal studies into human longevity, human life and longevity, said that long life and happiness is having friends. And so what we know that belongingness is really critical. It sort of raises really fundamental questions then about the way that we're working right now. The way that we're working right now, it might be optimized for productivity. It might be optimized for us getting individual work done. It's the equivalent of us wandering around that office before and finding a meeting room, but it's incredibly isolating for a lot of people. I think I read one piece of work yesterday that said that 58% of people say their mental health is in a worse place now than it was before. So being divorced from other people and being on our own is a really critical thing. It's why I've taken some time. I spend my whole time just chatting to people who are far more informed and educated on these things. And I've chatted to a lot of organizations in the last month or so who are hiring community managers. So this is something that community managers might have been something that web platforms like Twitch had. They might have wanted to foster community amongst their users, or message boards might have had community managers, or companies Google, when they opened their offices in Silicon Roundabout in London, hired a community manager to try and build connections. But what we're starting to see is organizations are hiring community managers internally, applying the same skills to fostering
That makes sense.
communities. Really interesting, because there's a few things that I think we're starting to witness have fundamentally changed. For me, societally, I love the fact that New York has announced that the outdoor eating experiment is going to be turned into something permanent. Wow, we've actually discovered something new through this adversity, and I do hope that UK cities follow the same. But we're learning other things, and I think organizations hiring community managers, people who are going to try and foster a sense of connection amongst the people who work there, seems to be one of the other things that we'll take from this.
I can see. I walk the dog and walk by the restaurants here on Broadway, and I see people in the cold. They sit there hungering over some food in a restaurant. I said, it's way too cold, by the way, but I think it has to do with the need for connection and the need for belonging. So that's why even in the cold, the restaurants are open and become sidewalks. But my biggest problem is this, and I agree with you. I have these 15 micro awakenings in the night. My biggest problem is I also have this 15 micro awakening during the day. So, during my work day, I go like, oh my God. So what I like very much this recommendation on community manager. This is something a company can do. Do you have your hacks? What are the hacks that for a perfect patient for this situation like me? What would be sort of the things I can do that sort of helps me to or sort of the routines that I have to change, or what are those hacks that you talk about that sort of what your research shows and what your experience shows that could work for people like me?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the critical things is that we can often have a misunderstanding about how our brain and cognition works. That we somehow have, through a combination of our educational studying and sort of lies that we've told ourselves, we've got this notion in our head that we can just continue work, and that is the way to maximize productivity. And one of the interesting lessons is that anytime anyone has actually studied the relationship between hours worked and output, it seems that that's not the case at all. It's far closer to the way that an athlete might train for a sporting event. They don't train 100 hours a week. They train an optimal amount that seems to keep their body in peak condition. So understanding that the brain is closer to that than to this sort of infinite and never-ending capacity, I think, is really critical. So as a result of that, then starting to think just about managing energy flows, taking breaks seems to be one of the most effective things that anyone can do. I mentioned some of the hacks that we've learned. One of the things that I'm hearing more and more from different people is the idea of a digital commute. And what that is that you schedule something for yourself, and it might be that 8 o'clock every day or at 8:30 every day, you go for a walk and you go and buy a coffee, or you go for a walk if you've got a dog, or you simply sort of you do your exercise class, and then you use that to transition to work. In fact, this is becoming so popular. I've seen that Microsoft are introducing it in the next update of Teams. So we're starting to see that these things that didn't necessarily exist before are starting to form part of the behaviors that we're adopting. Moments that I think are really helpful, because it shows that we're catalyzing change through these unexpected episodes, really. And that's a lesson that we haven't done till now. So you'll be aware that, through the last 20 years of just tantalizing, breathtaking technological change, but productivity hasn't increased. We've been working harder, actually. We've been working longer, actually, but productivity hasn't increased. It's largely because every time technology has thrown us an opportunity, we've said, no, we're going to carry on working like this.
I think
so it's like a big moment.
I think that the biggest problem is not productivity has not increased, but the biggest problem is that we, my generation, we've been trained to be productive. We've been succeeding because we have been better at planning our week, better at getting through the day, being more efficient with meetings, making decisions, and like know how you work so that you maximize the 12 hours. And what you say that is so important, it is just the opposite. If we want to be effective in this new world, and if we want to keep our mental health, if you will, we need and build sort of a world after this pandemic world, we actually need to give ourselves those breaks. We actually need to almost like do the opposite than what we've been trained to do. So to be sort of like this productivity, the animals of starting meeting on time, finishing meeting on time, having a deadline for the meeting, having an agenda for the meeting. Sometimes you just need to take a break in a way.
Absolutely.
I think that's so powerful. I think, and I love this idea of unexpected episodes. How you create some digital commute, if you will, that sort of like gives you some journey or some unexpected moments and episodes that it's not just a planned let's walk the dog at 10 or something like that, or let's have a copy at 12, because that's just another productivity improvement or maximization. So you need to figure out in this crazy world we live, you need to figure out how do you create sort of like a chance encounters or unexpected episodes.
So that actually brings us to a great question we've got here from Jen, who's asking, so serendipity is a great fuel to creativity. How do you think planned time in office model or remote work will still enable strong collaborative creative cultures? And it is this thing, when I've been speaking to lots of people recently about creativity in the workplace, where they've been saying that when people are at home, they get into kind of like a habitual, so they're so familiar with the place, they get into these little habits that they're blind to anything that's new, anything that might sort of interrupt their way of thinking and get them looking at a new direction. Is anyone looking at how we can fit those moments of serendipity back into these virtual office conditions that we've got?
Yeah, well, I think we need to, the secret is we need to be a lot more intentional, because you can entirely imagine a situation where, we come up with the new configuration for our firm that is that we work together in the office every Tuesday and Wednesday. And before you know it, everyone's just doing video calls together in the office on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we're doing video calls from home on the rest of the week. And, we'll start sitting there going, kind of, what's the point me spending £40 for a train to get into London if all I'm doing is I'm sitting there doing video calls? And we're not taking advantage of it. We need to be far more intentional and say on Tuesday and Wednesday we do different things. Now that they might be that we get together and we do a stand-up meeting at the start. We go through line by line where we are on projects. We do different interactions. But what that needs is it needs us to be far more intentional. And actually, the lesson overall about the way that we generally work in our jobs is that the only intentionality we have is our calendars and our inboxes. Most of us start the day by looking at our inbox thinking, I need to answer those 40 emails. We look at our calendar thinking, I need to answer those 40 emails between those 5 meetings. And that's the only intentionality we have. Now, actually, if you go and you say, what is the objective that we need to accomplish? It's why often a lot of software development teams are more productive when they work remotely, or that can make these things work because they've got a clear set of focuses. Most of us have got a non-linear set of things that we need to do. We're sort of like an air traffic control. We're managing emails in, we're managing emails out. And I think, the more we can probably pause, I think we've been gifted a really interesting opportunity where we've probably been told by the news of yesterday that in 6 months, we're going to be back to some degree of normalcy. And now we can start planning. So what does it look like from May the 1st or June the 1st, right? What days are which team's going to be in the office? Do we need a smaller office footprint? If we're committed to the office as it is for the moment, could we reversion some of our meeting room, some of our space into meeting spaces? What can we do? And I think most companies probably are not going to feel like they've got the answers for that, but they are going to feel like, okay, just to announce, here's our plan. We're intending to have everyone back in the office from this date, and we're going to be doing a series of experiments. So we're going to try different working days. We're going to try to see if we can do things differently. There's going to be a spirit of trying things out, and we need everyone to enter into those things with sort of an open-mindedness. When we look into some of the data, older workers want to stay. It's really interesting. Older workers want to stay working from home almost all of the time. And I suspect it's because they've got home offices, they've created these lovely spaces for themselves. Other people who are working in bedrooms are going to be in a situation where, or in kitchens or on sofas, they're not going to want to work from home all the time because the office has some advantages to it. So I think the more intentional, with a spirit of experimentation, but the more intentional we can be that we're designing new workplace cultures, I think it's going to be helpful for us.
I love I love the fact that, Bruce, and that's why I recommend your book, is that you're not just sort of having a interesting hacks or things that you need to do that is sort of incredibly relevant right now, but you also have the science behind it. You sort of researched it. You have the studies that sort of create substance to your recommendations. In one of the articles at the Harvard Business Review, you mentioned that one way to be intentional is actually to install a shower in the office. And you mentioned a producer, a Hollywood creative, if I remember, that takes 6 showers a day, which is kind of an extreme example, perhaps, in order to be intentional in the office. But I think what you're suggesting, which I thought is interesting, is that we come from the world where, because the Google founders believed in an open workspace, all the offices, the workplace design became open office, and we had ping pong tables because that's where Facebook and Google sort of like led the direction, and ping pong tables and all other sorts of amenities and that were part of the workplace. That's not necessarily anymore what leads are where we are going to now. Now we need to think about the workplace design in a totally new way. So in order to create, in order sort of like to create these serendipity. Oh, I forgot the word. Serendipity. I couldn't even say so, but and sort of like to figure out. I think it's going to be interesting. And what I also like, sort of, Bruce, is there isn't a set recipe. So the idea is to experiment, because what would work for our company here, Vivaldi Group, is different than it would work maybe for General Electric or something. So I think that your ideas along that way are really valuable.
Yeah, so there's a few different things there. So the reason why the gentleman was taking all of those showers is that he realized that he was unlocking a part of his brain. When we look into the way that our brains think, one of the systems in the brain that's sort of activated by boredom is the default mode. And what he discovered was that when he was away from his device, when he was away from his computer screen, his brain used to wander. It's sort of what you might get from a moment where you're walking the dog. He found that Aaron Sorkin is his name. He sort of he's written countless things that you've probably seen on TV or film. He wrote the Netflix Chicago 7 thing that was on a couple of weeks ago. So very famous for sort of zingy, sparky dialogue. He realized he was having his best ideas when he was in the shower, hence why he installed the shower in his office. And I think, look, critically for all of us, understanding that as you say, a spirit of experimentation, a spirit of not necessarily having all the answers is most likely to produce something that's satisfying for us. My feeling was very strongly that normally bosses don't have an intention to make work a wretched place for their teams, but in the absence of any evidence, they just make their own decisions. And I think, the reason why having data, the reason why having research, having evidence available to us just can make the conversation better informed is because, we start understanding the different components of what good working looks like.
And it seems like that me as a human being, every human being, rather than sort of planning sort of these breaks and go for coffee or walk, take the walk or do something that sort of break the productivity routine. What you're suggesting is that every one of us, we need to discover for ourselves what is that shower moment that Aaron Sorkin had. What is that moment for us? And it may be very different for Dave and for you, Bruce, than it is for me. And then once we discover that, and this is almost like an introspection, or maybe a discovery. You know, it may not be the shower. It may be I go for a run in Central Park, let's say. And there's a sort of everyone human being is sort of needs to discover that moment where they discover this moment, the shower moment, and then you can intentionally plan around that.
Yeah,
now there's.
Go on, Dave.
Sorry, I was just going to say that this is some of the stuff that I loved when you talk about the default mode network, because this is a really important thing that people don't understand. It's actually when you're doing nothing, you're being hugely productive when it comes to creativity. Because when we're doing these little, what we call low cognitive load tasks, like having a shower, washing the dishes, going for a run, driving a car, we're using just enough brain power to quieten down that voice that says, oh, you can't say that, you can't do that. And if we have put in previously the effort, the work, that means that we have thought around the problem and got, you talk about James Webb Young in your book, and he's got a phrase where he says that it's like wrapping the tentacles of your mind around a problem. You have to put that work in to understand the shape of the problem you're working with. Then it's when you go into these sort of default mode network, when you're doing these low cognitive tasks, that's when the ideas come to you. And the thing is that people generally frown on other people who put their feet in the desk and look out the window at work, but that could be potentially when they're doing the most valuable stuff.
Yeah, but how do you convince the boss? Come on, how do you convince the boss? And you say, like, look, what are you doing? You've been sitting here and staring into the sky. You know, why don't you get to work? And you say, like, excuse me, sir, I am in the default mode network. You know, I am extremely productive. I mean, come on, you guys. I mean, this is maybe a British thing, but in America, that doesn't work, guys.
It's an interesting thing, though. Is that, you know, to some extent, I wonder if we've just set things up and we've incentivized the wrong thing. I chatted to someone really at the start of lockdown who works at a national newspaper, and he said that we used to have 1,400 people coming into this office, effectively clocking in and clocking out, observing sort of respectable hours. And in lockdown, we've gone from 1,400 people to 30 people, and the product hasn't changed. And if our take from that is, but were they busy at 4 p.m? Were they busy at 5 p.m? Then we're missing the fact that our objective was to create a high quality product. And I'm reminded, I just saw it today, actually. It's something I used to think about all the time. But Charles Dickens, amazingly productive British author. I'm not sure how international his success was.
He was German, by the
way. But he wrote A Christmas Carol, which became sort of the story of Scrooge. But he wrote 15 novels, 200 short stories. He edited a weekly magazine, and he didn't work afternoons. And of course, you know, what we'd be doing right now is that his inbox would be full of requests for him to jump on a Zoom call at 3:00. People would be questioning why he wasn't answering his Slack after lunch, and of course would be obsessed with this notion that why is Dickens not putting in the hours, thinking in the illusion that if he'd only worked afternoons he'd have written 30 novels. Well, of course he wouldn't, because that's just not how it works. And I think, you know, sometimes we make a mistake of optimizing for the wrong things, with the consequence that we end up destroying the good stuff.
Yeah, do you think there's an over-focus where companies are looking at efficiency rather than effectiveness? And that if we're then trying to...
Yeah.
It's the fundamentals. I think what I hear, this is so important. That's why I think it's important to look at that book and have a conversation with you, Bruce. It is, and look at your podcast, because it is fundamentally changing a lot of the assumptions. It's almost like an inflection point of what the assumptions of work used to be, and what the assumptions of work, what we must challenge, the basic assumptions that we had until now, and what we have to do now going forward. And there is no recipe. I think it's what you said, there is part in experimentation. You can learn from science and from the work you have done, Bruce, but there is also a almost, you need to also have this, it's your company, your person, and sort of figure that out in a journey of where to go, and what is sort of the new workplace, the workplace of the future.
Now, I think we're going to have to start wrapping this up, but there's a question in here that I really want to get you to answer, Bruce, because it's from Rennie Ismail, who has asked, is there any advice for young graduates and students entering the business workforce during this remote era? Because when you've not got the support and the mentorship of people who are constantly there for you, and you don't quite know what the work culture is, that people have got these existing relationships and understandings, and you're joining from the comfort of a Zoom window. How do you get into it? What would be your advice for young graduates or students, or even just anyone who is starting a company in a new position during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I deeply empathize, because the one thing we know that people who start work during recessions, generally it can be a lot harder for them throughout the rest of their career. So, I would hope actually that maybe we're going to see a rapid economic recovery next year, and it'll be good for those people. But I think the really critical thing is what you said there, is that the importance of building networks, building connection, and having some one-to-one relationships with people. And I would say try and err on the side of learning from people rather than wanting necessarily solipsistically to be talking about yourself to those people. So, is there stuff that you can learn from office elders? Is there stuff that you can learn from other people in the firm, in the industry, and using those one-to-ones to try and tap into their knowledge, maybe ask them to talk you through some deals that they've done or some things that they've done, rather than necessarily turning up. I think there can be a danger with some mentorship that you turn up every week wanting to talk about how your career is going. I think, err on the side of trying to recreate what you might have gathered from those casual conversations that happen in offices, rather than necessarily a sort of self-reflective. But yeah, absolutely, try and build those connections. I was really interested. I met one organization who were a primary goods manufacturer, and they said one thing they discovered about lockdown is that relationships between peers at the same level had got stronger. There are more calls together. They'd seen each other inside each other's homes. Some of the domestic barriers that we put up, they'd seen each other's children, they'd seen each other's pets, they'd seen each other's bed sits wherever they live. So those barriers had broken down. But what they'd not broken down is that connections between different levels of the hierarchy had gone. People are no longer seeing each other by the elevator. No, people are no longer seeing each other in the local coffee shop. And so that those things that used to allow Eric to chat to the new grad, they've gone now. And I think, if you can try in any way to recreate some of those connections, they could be helpful.
I like this concept. Also, British a scientist, philosopher, the Dunbar numbers, who says that you have these 5 intimate relationships that any human being, he derived it from anthropology, 5 intimate relationship. Then there are 15 more important ones, and then there are 150, and everything else isn't really a relationship. And maybe what has happened, that technology made us think that the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of connections we have really matters. And what to the question that Renee has posed here, I think that was the name, Ismail has posed here, is that that what we need to think in this new world is to think about what are those 5 connections. Nobody does it alone. And it's like, I like to go back to the beginning of our broadcast here, when you said that the metaphor of a savanna. So if you imagine you are a young graduate, you go out into the workplace, it's more like a savanna, it's more like the wild. And how do you get through that? You go through that through a close connected network, that. And I think having that introspection and saying, like, this is what it's important to me, this is how I'm going to get through that wild savanna, if you will, and make my life. I think maybe that's a very good guideline and thought to leave this podcast.
Fantastic. Bruce, we've got, just to wrap up where we are, if a lot of your advice is aimed at the people who are actually in the workforce, who are the employees, but a lot of this stuff should really be starting with the employer. As we're in this stage now where things are up in the air and we're talking about experimenting, would you have any tips for employers right now to be able to harness the opportunities to bring their workforce together in the current situation?
Yeah, I think right now treating the situation we're in as a problem that we're going to try and solve together is probably the most helpful thing. So, saying to your team, listen, what I'd love you to do is I'd love you to think about how we could create a better working culture together. What are the things that we don't want to let go of? What are the things that we're really keen to let go of? Who wants to create an experiment and when we go back to this, commit to sharing the findings of that experiment? Who wants to create models of how we might work, and empowering your team to come up with those things? I think it's what I would say, because this is completely uncertain. I don't think anyone's got the answers. No one knew when we entered into this situation in March that this is what November would look like. So I think, harnessing the hive mind of your team probably is the most productive thing that anyone can do.
I have a suggestion. Your book that I highly recommend is Eat, Sleep, Work, and Repeat. There needs to be a new book, a sequel, and it goes like, eat, sleep, and repeat. Forget work, and convince your boss that you're really very productive right now, because you are into the creativity mode, in what you call the default mode network. So that would be a good sequel for that. I think that was fantastic, Bruce. I think there should be a continued conversation about those ideas, because, what I really like about it is that there is no pat answer. So you're not coming and say like, okay, this is what you got to do, 1, 2, 3, because it's not that easy. I love the idea that what you need to do as a first step, experiment and then talk to the people. And how do you build together the new place? Because it can't be a recipe like it was. Everybody needs to be an open workplace like it was 20 years ago. We failed on those dimensions. Yeah. And so I think that it's a very practical advice. Thank you so much for the time, Bruce.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Bruce. That's been a great session. Thank you to everyone who gave us comments. We couldn't get through all the comments there. Man alive, I can't believe that the time has zipped by the way it has. It's been a fascinating conversation, something that affects everyone here. So thank you so much again, Bruce. Thank you, Eric, as ever, for your wonderful mind in these things. And especially thank you, lovely viewer, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching again. We love you very much, and we will see you back here again very soon. Thank you from all of us. Bye now.
Thank you.